Alright, so hey everyone, today I want to take a look at the dead zones for Doom The Dark Ages. This is being demonstrated on the Xbox Series X in case it differs on other platforms. Before I really get into things, you can see that the graphs look pixelated, and that seems to be this game filtering the input through as a lower resolution, and this has a few negative effects throughout the controls. This probably isn't too generally noticeable, but definitely will be noticeable in certain areas, especially if we get options like Deadzone options, where it will be more obvious if it's not corrected. As a reference, controllers have varying resolutions, and Xbox controllers output 16-bit resolution, which means about 65,000 values. Now, whether the controller can actually physically output those values, who knows? It could just be a few hundred that are mapped to that range. But PlayStation controllers can output 8-bit, which is 256 values. So in either case, that's much higher than what's here. Dark Ages seems to input the resolution at about 6-bit, which is about 64 values per axis. So the controller values aren't able to be fully expressed with this game's current resolution. And this wasn't the case in Doom Eternal. Doom Eternal had, at least for its movement and camera, it used perfectly high resolution, with the exception of its weapon wheels, which I'm not sure exactly the resolution used there, but for movement and camera it is quite clear, and I'll show a side-by-side between the dot graphs, and you can see that it's quite clearly different and smooth in Eternal. So that's the first request I'd like to ask, is that this just be increased to normal float resolution. I don't know what the reason for this is, but I don't think that should be a performance issue or anything. But getting into it, we have what should be about a 15% radial dead zone for the movement. Now, obviously it looks pretty jagged, but if I say draw a circle, you can see that based on the resolution, the steps are right past what would be 15%. Now you can see there are these thin blue lines, and this is reasons of perfectly cardinal movement. So if your stick is within any of these blue lines, you'll be moving perfectly in one of 4 directions. I'm not going to or spend too much time on this, simply because what probably should be here is full diagonal movement. This is probably a byproduct of the resolution, meaning that this is being any movement within this range is essentially being limited to 0, and then the first movement is about 3.2%, so that's the first step. So this is probably full diagonal movement, just the resolution is functionally making it so that it's there's an actual dead zone here. The movement curve is sort of linear steps, so there's a shallow curve up until this first shaded region. Oh, and I actually should remove auto sprint for this. So at this first shaded region, you can see that there's an increase in speed, and then it increases a little more linearly here, and then the next shaded region, you can see that there's another increase in speed, and then it increases a little more linearly till the end. So there are pretty much 3 broad hard tiers of gradients, and I think that this should just instead be a smooth linear curve. Shouldn't be any steps, because how this currently works is if you move the stick slightly, it feels like you're moving way too slow, but otherwise you're moving at faster speeds. It feels like you just have very slow speeds and then a very fast speed to work with. This is exaggerated in the diagonal regions. You can see that this threshold for this first speed increase is a little more squarish, and then dips in right in the perfect diagonals. Whereas this faster speed increase is sort of clover shaped, and then dips in very close to this the first increase. And this can make it so that when your perfect diagonals are very slow, and then you have a very small region for the second step, and then your faster speeds. So basically your perfect diagonal really only has two speed steps, where it's this very subtle, very slow gradient, and then your faster speed gradient. So making this curve perfectly linear, and then making the smooth transition perfectly radial, so there's no kind of a squarish or clover shape. It's just a smooth radial transition, linear transition, would be requested to smooth the movement out. Of course, you're going to be moving at full speed for the most part, but since there is granularity offered, I think it should be set up as smooth as possible. Now, the striped region represents the sprint threshold, and I'm going to turn auto sprint back on. The threshold is the same whether you have auto sprint or if you toggle it with a stick click, but you can see the threshold, at least perfectly forward, is the same as the larger normal movement speed jump, but then deviates from it. It's a little flatter. And then dips inward in the diagonals, and then has a little over 90-degree angular threshold. Might be a little difficult to see on this graph, but at this point right here, there actually is a tiny square of where you can sprint. And that, of course, is a byproduct of the resolution. So as far as sprinting, I played through this the first playthrough with toggling sprint, but I had wondered, what the benefit is for not sprinting. There might be some balance reason that they don't, they want to have you sprint and not sprint. But replaying the levels, I've kept auto sprint on just because it's just far more useful. And I think in combination with the request I gave to change the movement curve to be perfectly linear and radial, I think we can. You could also set it up so that this sprint threshold is not a hard threshold like it is here, but have a smooth transition to the sprint speed, at least for controllers. For a mouse and keyboard, maybe that's not. You have to set it up differently, but with a controller, you could just have this be your default movement and just have a completely smooth gradient from your slowest movement speed up to the sprint speed, and just have it be a nice smooth gradient for that. But not too important for the sprint threshold. I think that's just a very easy possibility, since with having analog control there. The other movements, dead zones, are for the Atlan as well as the Dragon. The central dead zone shape is identical for those. However, it's the sprint threshold and boost thresholds that differ. I couldn't accurately test the Atlans. It had two thresholds, one for triggering a sprint, and then you'd have to pull back further to stop the sprint, but that threshold was kind of difficult was inconsistent, so I couldn't reliably test that, especially with the lower resolution. It would have been a nightmare to test, so I just didn't. If they fix the resolution, I'll go back and try to see what I can get. But for the Dragon, the boost threshold is the majority of the stick, so even within the dead zone. And to start a sprint and to stop a sprint, you have to just move the stick back far enough, so you have to be pretty clear about a backwards movement to trigger it. Otherwise, everything else is identical. For the camera, we should probably have a close to perfectly 15% radial dead zone, similar to the camera, but if we or similar to the movement. But if we look closer, we can see that the camera dead zone is actually a little bigger. Not horizontally. Horizontally, it triggers the same value, but diagonally, it's a little larger, and vertically, about 3%. So horizontally, at least based on the resolution, we have about we start seeing movement about 15.7%, but vertically about 18.8%, and now if I draw a 15% circle, you can see that there are probably steps given the resolution that happen earlier than this, but what's happening here is there seems to be about 15% radial dead zone, and then an axial dead zone present. That's this blue region, I'll get to that in a second. But with Eternal, in my testing for that, the restriction flares right around the dead zone, and that flaring is normally caused by an axial dead zone being on top of it, so it seems like there's a radial dead zone with some angular restriction, and then an axial dead zone on top of that, and that would slightly square the radial shape as well as slightly increase the size, and that could push it further so that the diagonal thresholds would have to jump to the next step with this lower resolution. Vertically, what could happen is if there's any issue with the check that it's beyond the dead zone size, it has to go to the next step. So horizontally we have about 15.7%, but if it evaluates it and doesn't find that true, it has to go to the next step, which is another 3% further. And one of the things I'd like to request is dead zone size options for both the movement and the camera dead zone. And so this could range from 0 to 30%, just to give a very wide range for any player preference. But part of getting the resolution fixed is even if, say, a player wants to play at a 0% dead zone, because of the resolution, they wouldn't be able to play at anything functionally lower than a 3%, because that would be the next step. Whereas with high resolution, you know, be able to see movement immediately past 0%. So that resolution issue would be more visible with lower dead zones. But as far as these angular restriction, so if your stick is within these blue regions, you'll be moving in one of 4 directions. In this case, perfectly left. You can see that I'm bobbing the stick up and down, and the camera is moving perfectly left, perfectly right, perfectly up, and perfectly down. You only start seeing diagonal movement when you break out into these green regions. And one thing which does occur when moving past the dead zone, but more obvious here, is that based on the lower resolution, you can actually lose a bit of early turn speeds. You can see that it's just slightly abrupt when breaking out of this threshold. And when testing this on Doom Eternal, the threshold was about 17.7%, whereas here This is about 18.8% when this, and that's based on the resolution steps. So you're, it's starting about 1% faster than it would if the controls were at a higher resolution. So nothing crazy dramatic, but definitely with low resolution that this is currently using, you're losing potential values that Eternal offered. But for this restriction, I'd like to request an option to control this, because having a restricted diagonal movement makes it so that the camera doesn't move in the direction you point the stick, and you have to essentially overcorrect to be able to make the diagonal movements you want. So having an option to control this would allow players to keep it at default if they're happy with this, or set it to 0 so that they'd have full diagonal movement, or even set it higher. So what we have here is about 17% around each axis is restricted, so a range from 0 to say 30 should cover every possible preference for angular restriction. For the acceleration curve, we have what should be a quadratic curve. This should be identical to Eternal's curve, but is only slightly different because I test in 10% increments, and based on where those steps were at the resolution that Dark Ages uses, this will be different on that. But otherwise, it's a quadratic curve that increases until you hit this threshold where acceleration kicks in and increases about 1.4 times, and then increases the rest of the way as a quadratic. You can see that on the graph it does flatline just past this acceleration jump, and that's simply because the value just after the jump, as well as the I think 98% that I tested, are on the same resolution step. So that's a resolution issue and not the actual curve issue. But of course, I'd like to request an option to control this acceleration curve. So we have a quadratic as default, but getting an option to control the exponent for the power function would give players a ton of control over this. So if players found this curve too sluggish, they could choose to use something closer to linear or even linear. So a range from 1 to say 3 should cover players' preference. So if they thought it was too slow, they could lower it, make it more linear, or if they thought it was too fast, they could push it to more cubic, and players will find their preference that way. Getting an option for the acceleration jump would also be requested. It's about 1.4 times, and this jump can be jarring for some, and they might want to reduce or remove it to make the controls feel more reliable, but also possibly increase it so they could play at lower sensitivities but with higher acceleration jump, so they can still turn fast but have lower general sensitivity for more precision, and that would allow players to do that. So a range of one times, which would remove this multiplier, or remove it, increase to 2 times, should cover player preference on that. As far as the you can see that this acceleration jump also is completely radial and applies all the way across the stick range. So this is actually kind of interesting because the camera is set up radially, but the movement has these weird squarish and clover thresholds. So really what I was requesting for the movement is already applied to the camera. Just apply the movement thresholds in gradient the same as the camera's already applied. Now the other thing is the diagonal acceleration or sensitivity. So you can see that on this graph my stick can move off of this graph, and normally what that can cause is your turn speed, your diagonal turn speed being faster than your cardinal, but that's not the case here. It's properly normalized so that your diagonal speeds are the same exact as your cardinal speeds, so that's properly set up, no issues there. As far as options, Starting with the look acceleration, I had seen some pre-release footage from Draku, and he shared the options, and I was kind of worried because the look acceleration option wasn't here, and the look acceleration option controls the smoothing, and this causes your turn speed to build up over time. So you can see that if I move the stick fully and switch directions, there's a slight lull in changing directions, and this is because your turn speed needs to build up to the speed you've selected over some time, and based on this option, the higher it is, the longer it takes to build up there. But if we, oops, lower it, you can see that this is instant, so the angular change is instant, and your movements are being output faster directly. So smoothing can make your camera movements feel more sluggish and less predictable, because as you your turn speed is in flux until it caps. And it's good to see this here. This was in 2016 as well as internal. However, needed a lot of requests to get it into 2016's launch. It wasn't there in the alpha or the beta. But it was simply, it's good to see it here. So that pre-release wasn't accurate. But for the sensitivities, you can see that I have the horizontal sensitivity set to 55% and the vertical sensitivity to 100%. And this is because these sliders are not weighted the same. The vertical sensitivity is weighted significantly slower than the horizontal. So this is the approximate ratio of how I've set them to be the same. And I'll have my tests numbers on screen. The vertical tests aren't super accurate. Or at least are less accurate than the horizontal, but I think are reasonably close. But there are some issues aside from just the general unintuitive nature of this. If you want the sensitivities the same, you do have to put the vertical sensitivity higher, and if you want them the same, you can't really play at much higher sensitivities than this, because you can't raise the vertical sensitivity any higher than this. One of the other big issues is that differing axis sensitivities affects your diagonal movement. So you can see that I have them at basically the same right now ratio. So if I move at 45 degrees, the camera moves at close to 45 degrees. But if I use a very extreme ratio with vertical sensitivity at 0 and the horizontal at 100, and make the same 45 degree moves with my stick, you can see that the camera movement is extremely horizontally biased, because the vertical sensitivity is that much faster, and you have to make extremely vertical movements to be able to see close to 45 degree movements occur. So if you want correct diagonal movement, you really have to have these sensitivities be the same, as well as you can't play faster than this. So it's unintuitive to have to fiddle with this. Because the values are kind of arbitrary. I do have a tool that I'll share in the description that at least has an estimate on the vertical sensitivity, so you can fiddle with it and try to find vertical ratios that might suit you. But my request is simply to make the vertical sensitivity equal to the horizontal, so that you can so players can set them the same. So if you have the horizontal and vertical sensitivities at the same value, you get the same sensitivities for both. By default, the horizontal sensitivity is 40 and the vertical sensitivity is 32. So they do want lower vertical sensitivities, but they can simply set it lower. They don't have to modify the slider so that it's lower weight. So just have the vertical sensitivity weighted the same. Additionally, as far as sensitivity, the weapons actually all affect your sensitivity. So when firing, your sensitivity slows down. I was only able to accurately test the automatics, but it seems to apply to all weapons. So like if I turn around, you can see that this is the sensitivity at this value. But if I start shooting, you can see that I've slowed down. If I switch to the cycler, you can see that this too slows down. If I switch to pulverizer, I think you can see that this slows down. And while it's firing, chain shot. See that slow down? The rocket launcher. Fire slows down. It's not too noticeable with the super shotgun, but it's very noticeable with the burst for the normal shotgun. So I'm not sure why this is the case. I don't know if this is some sort of game feel thing. They thought maybe they thought it made the weapons feel more punchy, or maybe there was a sort of light aim assist implementation for this where they want to slow it down so players are more accurate while shooting. But I think it'd be nice to have an option to be able to control this so that your firing sensitivity is the same as your general look around moving sensitivity, just for consistency. Because as it is, you sort of have to adapt to 2 or more different sensitivities, because the sensitivities aren't even the same while firing between the different weapons. So that could feel a little inconsistent. So having an option to have everything, having your sensitivity just be static across the board would be nice. But looking at aim assist, this aim assist option controls 2 types of aim assist. One is the sensitivity slowdown. So when your crosshair is close to an enemy, your sensitivity drops and slows down while near an enemy. And this is pretty standard in most games, and the strength is pretty standard. The other one is when you're close enough to a target, your crosshair will be dragged slightly, but this is very subtle compared to most other games. If we compare it to, say, Halo or Call of Duty, this is almost negligible in comparison. So if it didn't add it, it probably wouldn't even be noticed by players. But that's how what this option controls, and of course the strength, and that's at the strength at 100. So at lower, your tracking aim assist is really going to be negligible. However, they've added, actually, one thing to mention is in Draku's demonstration of the options pre-release, they still had the target assist, which was a sort of auto snap targeting for the zoom mode with tactical scope for the heavy cannon in Doom Eternal, but there is no scope like that in Dark Ages, and that's not present in the release version. So it's kind of funny that that's a holdover option that didn't even apply to this game. But the difficulty options did add an enhanced targeting assist, and this is some very generous auto aim. So if your crosshair is anywhere even in the ballpark of an enemy, at least for the cycler and the shredder, it will dramatically alter the bullet's trajectory to hit them. This doesn't apply to projectile weapons, and that makes sense because you might want to lead targets. But this, if you're considering aim assist, this is definitely has far more of an effect than the dedicated aim assist under these control options. But moving to the radial wheel dead zone. I think the central dead zone is about 50%. Now for the transitions between the weapons, this graph is actually tested a little specifically. So while keeping it open like this, I couldn't find reliable thresholds for when it switched weapons. So the way I had tested it was to open the wheel and then just input a value and then record where the thresholds were. So you can see that moving beyond this threshold, there's a bit of a gradient before it switches, so it kind of holds on to the one that's currently selected a little bit. It's not very visible in this video, but there is a significant difference when testing. And that's sort of obvious right here. You can see that it's currently to the top right, but I have to move to about the negative 3.2% over here, but then back over to the positive 3.2 over here to have it switch back. So there's a little gap right here that's, in this case, leftward bias, where this kind of overlaps the axis here, and this overlaps the axis in the other way. But otherwise, this divisions are perfectly broken up into 6 selections, so no issue there. It is sort of interesting that Doom Eternal's 6-way wheel was actually oriented with the top where the slice was right here, and this just rotated. That really doesn't matter at all. It's just a difference between the 2 games. One thing that I really liked about this is you can remap the wheel button and still use the right stick to select on the wheel. So by default, the radial wheel is mapped to the right bumper, or R1 if you're on PlayStation. But in Eternal, if you switched it, depending on where you switched it, it might force you to use the left stick. So I've remapped it right now to the left bumper, and in Eternal that would force you to use the right stick to use the wheel, which unfortunately would cut off your movement. But in this game you can just keep using the right stick, so I think that's very convenient. I haven't tested other buttons, but in Eternal some of the presets made sense for it to use the left stick. For example, there was a strafe preset where the wheel was mapped to the Y button or triangle, and there it would make sense to use the left stick unless you're claw gripping the controller. And I had actually brought up there was a console command that seemed to control which thumbstick controlled the wheel while the wheel was out, and I think that option could be added just in case players did want to use the left stick based on where they have it mapped, just for that kind of control. I'm not sure how many players that would apply to, but that's always something possible to consider. One problem that remains with the wheel that I had requested quite a few times throughout Eternal's lifespan was the weapon wheel delay. I had requested it, and they did add it during its support period. And by default, it's 180 milliseconds. And what this does is, if you tap the wheel button within that delay time, you switch to your previous weapon. And in the Dark Ages, they've added it so you could also choose to have it cycle forward through all your weapons. But if you hold it longer than that delay period, the radial wheel appears. My issue with it is this delay makes it so that you have to wait for the wheel, and this makes it so that there's a delay on the wheel. And Eternal, this was particularly bad because that game was much more heavily incentivized quick swapping, and forcing this delay made it so that the console players couldn't truly quick swap to anything but their previous weapon. If they wanted to switch quick swap to any of the other 6, they had to wait through the delay to be able to do that. So, and you can see that if I tried to switch too fast, I have the super shotgun out, but if I try to switch too fast, you can see that it's just not registering any of those. I have to slow down and wait until that delay is finished to be able to switch. And you can see that the camera was jerking around while doing that because before the wheel's registered, I'm still controlling the camera. So you really have to baby the wheel to make sure that your inputs register. Whereas if we were actually allowed to set this to 0, the wheel should appear instantly and you'd be able to switch instantly. So that's still my request, is to lower this weapon wheel open delay to 0 to be able to do that. I mean, the argument for probably why they kept it at 70 was because they wanted you to be able to tap and select your previous weapon. But if you want that, you can still keep some delay. But for players who just want to use the wheel, setting it to 0 will allow them to do that without any delay. Now that about covers everything for the controls specifically, but I do want to add a few other requests for the game in general. So as far as graphics, I think of course this game looks fantastic, but one of the big things that might be obvious on this video, but certainly in certain other parts of the game, is that the consoles don't have any film grain options, and film grain in this game is extremely heavy. And I think I'm definitely of the opinion that film grain largely just degrades image quality, and that's really the case here, especially in certain areas with fog, and I mean just in general, but especially areas with fog, it's very, very noticeable. So PC already has an option for this, so it would just be porting that option to consoles. But that'd be great because the game looks great. It just forcing this option just stops it from looking as good as it could. The other one is this field of view slider doesn't seem to work properly, at least on Xbox. I don't know if PlayStation has this issue, but if I raise it to say 120, nothing changed. And if I raised it to, or lowered it to 90, nothing changed. I think it can change. It's just not reliable. If I'll reload the game, maybe it'll update, but that should just be fixed so that it registers properly. It worked perfectly fine in Eternal, so I don't know what little bug there is here. The other thing I'd like to request is an option for the field of view for guns. It'd be nice to see that, because when you use higher field of views, the weapon models still stay the same shape, and it can kind of be a disconnect between your weapons and the world. Doom Eternal had a mod that did this, and I think the weapons there felt like very natural looking like that, and it'd be really cool to see that officially supported in this game. Of course, the issue is sometimes these models aren't fully modeled because you don't see all of them, so there can be some clipping things, but I think that's perfectly acceptable for players to put on themselves. You can always default to this normal field of view for weapons, and then just have let players control the rest of it themselves. The other thing would be a VSync toggle, and VSync's of course here to stop screen tearing. but it normally does introduce some input latency, and I don't think it's too dramatic in this game, at least. But anything you can do to lower input latency can be helpful. So some players might, be happy with this as it is, just for the visual clarity. But other players might want to disable, have an ability to disable VSync to get that extra bit of responsiveness to the controls, and having that option would be great. For difficulty, Hugo Martin's already spoken on the things I'd request, and everything I'd request. The two things I would request have already been requested by many other players. So one is the slowdown when parrying projectiles. That slowdown's really cool, but having the option to play in real time always would be cool to have. Again, Hugo's already mentioned that, so it's probably on the board for at some point. And the other thing is the parry window. The parries in this game, the window is giant, and even at the small size, it's still pretty generous. So just having lower levels for those who want to sweat a little more would be great. The other stuff is for model galleries. I love model galleries in games, and I think what they have here is pretty great, and what they've had since really 2016. Though I do have some complaints with it. It doesn't cover all the monsters in the game, so we don't have the variants. So the Battle Knights aren't shown in the gallery, so I think that'd be nice to be able to switch between them. Like we have the toy for the Hell Knight, but I think it should give us, the Battle Knights as well as the Mancubus would also give us the armored version, and same with the Arachnotron. I think one other really cool thing to improve the model galleries would be allowing the demon destruction to be visible, either have like a few presets or have some way for the player to destroy the models so that we can see the bones and gore and muscle stuff, because that's a really cool system that you really appreciate it in game, but the destroyed models are really cool, and being able to see them in a static gallery like that would be awesome. The last thing for the model gallery would also, for the hide toggle to actually hide UI toggle to actually remove the banner elements. It hides the inputs, but it doesn't hide the banner, so just being able to see the model itself would be just a very small improvement there. The last thing is just a request for the master levels. So master levels were added to Eternal, and they were all great, the ones we got. However, my biggest complaint was we didn't get ones for the early levels, and while the progression from a new game is good in these games, after you get all the weapons and replay levels, the early levels become pretty trivial, and that was definitely a case for Eternal, where really the strongest enemies you fought there were the Arachnotrons and the Cacodemons, and they just couldn't handle rocket launchers or ballistas. And master levels would have really improved those, because Hell on Earth is a wonderful location in that game, and I think that's definitely would help the case here. Ideally, we could get master levels for every level in this game, but if they're only giving us a limited amount like what Eternal got, focusing on the early levels would really be good to try to bump up the challenge of them, because as it is, replaying the early levels in Dark Ages, it also becomes pretty trivial. There's nothing that can really handle the stronger weapons and upgrades you have. So yeah, that's a ton of rambling. So hopefully I imagine we'll get quite a few updates throughout this. We got DLCs coming, so there are hopefully many opportunities to see these things improved on. Certainly the controls are the highest priority for this, but I'd like everything to be improved if possible. But yeah, so I'll just have a summary on screen. But thanks for watching, and everyone have a great rest of your day.